I was sitting on my bed with one foot on the floor and the other on the bed. I had only been home for about 10 or 15 minutes after leaving the hospital. My mini blinds were closed, but the blackout curtains in my bedroom were open. At that time, I was also living alone in a 3-bedroom house. I had spent a couple of nights at the hospital with my mom that week, and had come home just to kill some time and pay a few bills on my computer. I had paid a few other bills, and was in the middle of confirming my payment of my Lowe's credit card, and it was like something spoke to me, but in what I can only describe as in a telepathic manner, like hearing without the sound going into my ears. The sound seemed to come from someone that seemed like they were 1 to 2 miles away. But inside of the room at the same time, the sound or source of the sound also seemed to be directional, which caused me to look towards what I would later discover was a NW direction from my house. I then began to see what I can only describe as a vibrating point of extremely bright light, which seemed to be coming towards me from more than a mile away. Something like a portal began to form and slowly spread outwardly from the bright light which was at the center. It was like the opposite of what a person sees when they are about to pass out and start losing their peripheral vision. If you can imagine, it was like reverse tunnel vision. The surfaces layers of the doors and walls started to suddenly disappear until I could see into my kitchen and then the dining room and through the left rear corner wall of the house until I could see the sunlight and trees outside. While all of this was happening, the bright vibrating light was coming closer and appearing to get larger, and then the trees started to disappear. The light was coming toward me, and a telepathic voice called me son in my mother's voice, but it was in a way that I had never heard her voice before. My mother had a very raspy voice which was caused by 40 years of smoking 2 packs of Winston cigarettes per day. Her voice was extremely clear, soft, and she sounded so excited and happier than I had ever heard her. She had suffered from postpartum depression after I was born and had suffered from depression for most of my life. Then something happened to me which I can only describe as an out-of-body experience. I've looked for ADC and OBE reports since that day, and I could only find one that was almost exactly described as my own. It seemed as if my own consciousness was outside of my body, but still tethered to my physical body somehow. We were suddenly both in what seemed like another dimension, and completely surrounded by what seemed like the darkness of outer space. But I couldn't perceive any points of light, or any object other than her spirit or light. I couldn't see, hear, or feel the sensation of anything else. It was as if I were out of my own body, and didn't have a body to experience any of my 5 earthly senses. In that seemingly empty black darkness with only my mother's light, I was overwhelmed and surrounded with the greatest feeling of love that I've ever experienced. I've never experienced feeling love that much in my entire life. If all of the love I've felt and received my entire life were combined, it would only be about 2% of the love that my spirit felt in that place or dimension. It was as if I were being loved by what I can only describe as being loved by a great all. It was so beautiful that I wanted to stay there forever in that place of no anger, no hate, no loneliness, no fear, no sadness, no pain, no grief, and no suffering. She was happier than I had ever seen her in my entire life, as if all of her burdens had been lifted. I can't remember all that she communicated to me in that place, but I do remember the most important things that she said to me. She told me that she was going back to where we all came from. She said not to be sad for her because she was free from all of the pain that she experienced during her life. She said that we will all be together again someday. She wanted to thank me for forgiving her and for loving her as much as I did during her lifetime. Then it was like I was suddenly pulled out of that place and sucked right back into my body, as if I had only blinked my eyes for a few seconds. Then I saw a bright light suddenly pass through the opposite corner wall of my bedroom. Her spirit light seemed to be moving extremely fast in a southeastern direction, and then it was all over. I started to question my own sanity and mental health. I was worried that I might have schizophrenia, although I've never heard of anyone on either side of my family having it. Then I tried to deny what had just happened and thought maybe all of that was just my imagination. My mother was fine and even laughing shortly before they were taking her back to the ICU for observation, and the doctor even said it wasn't anything serious. I was very conflicted after that because it all seemed real, no matter how illogical and irrational it all seemed at the time. When I couldn't deny it, I became extremely afraid that my mother had just died at the hospital and that she was somehow able to say goodbye. She communicated some secret forbidden knowledge to me about the afterlife, like she was still around in a loving place. I actually began to pray that no one would call my phone before I got back to the hospital. Yet deep in my heart, I already knew there was no reason to go back there because she wasn't there any longer. I would only find her body and my grieving sisters. I felt really bad for my sisters because they never got a chance to forgive my mother or hear her give a real heartfelt apology to them for things that had happened to them. The day before she died, I had a disagreement with my oldest sister and tried to tell her to delay Mom's minor surgery because she wasn't strong enough to survive. She had fallen into a deep depression several weeks earlier and had stopped eating and taking her heart medications. She had a minor stroke a week earlier. I'm my mother's youngest child and her only son. My older sisters have never listened to me or taken my advice. When Mom did survive the minor surgery that morning and they called us to the recovery room, I was so happy that my intuition was wrong. My sisters were in the recovery room eating, laughing, and joking, but for some reason I couldn't be in the same happy mood that they were in. My complete attention was on Mom. I couldn't stop trying to comfort her by holding her hand, kissing her forehead, stroking her hair, and telling her how much I loved her. My sisters stayed in the recovery room after they start to roll Mom into the ICU for observation. But I stayed with her until I wasn't allowed to go any further. I kissed her and told her that I loved her for the last time that day, not knowing that she would die less than an hour later. It took me a couple of years to find the courage to share my ADC experience with anyone, and since that day, almost 16 years ago, I have probably only talked about it to 6 or 7 people. I really don't know if my experience was a blessing or a curse. My life has been extremely difficult since that October day. Within a month after my ADC, I started having severe daily headaches and stroke-like symptoms that continued daily for the next 11 years. Doctors couldn't find the cause of the headaches or any solution. During the following 11 years, there were several other paranormal experiences that happened in that house, but there was never another ADC OBE. My father died almost 5 years later. He was in my arms at our local hospice, immediately after my father was dying. While I was holding him in my arms, there was a moment when he was still there in his body, and then he wasn't. I felt the presence of his spirit and another being behind me in the hospice room while watching me holding him. The feeling was so strong that I actually turned around and looked to see if I could see anything, and then they were both gone. It also seemed to open the door to other positive and negative paranormal experiences, which I never thought I would ever experience. However, there were no other ADCs that ever happened when I was fully awake after that day. But I do have regular vivid dreams about my father, where we spend lots of time together. These dreams seem almost real. I honestly think that such experiences, such as communicating with the dead, seem to break universal, religious, and dimensional laws in some way. It's not something that I intentionally tried to do or caused to happen. It seems more like I was just open to the experience or was invited to experience it. It wasn't something that I thought was possible until it happened. Time actually seems to be slower there. The whole experience seemed like it lasted for about 10 minutes. That does it for today's video. Let me know what you thought about it in the comment below.